I paint winter, and I paint spring and summer. But there's my favorite. I just love to paint summer.
America's favorite artist was keeping a secret. Behind the cheerful family scenes, Norman Rockwell was concealing something that might have ruined his career. In 1964, he created a painting that brought adult men to tears and mothers to cover their children's eyes. The painting depicted the ugly reality about America that nobody wished to confront. Gallery owners would not display it. Newspapers wouldn't publish it. But Rockwell painted it anyway, knowing that it could destroy all he had created. The painting that nearly killed his career shows us the true Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell was born on February 3, 1894, in Harlem, New York City, at 789 St. Nicholas Avenue. His parents were Jarvis and Nancy Rockwell. His father worked for a Philadelphia textile firm and remained in that position his entire life. They weren't wealthy, but they managed. Norman had an older brother named Jarvis, and despite living under the same roof, they weren't particularly close. His mother was Episcopalian and his father was Presbyterian, so things were a bit of a mix at home. Years before Norman was born, his ancestors traced back to England as far as 1635, when John Rockwell sailed to America aboard a vessel named the Hopewell and assisted in settling Connecticut. Already at a young age, even as a little boy, Norman was unique. At the tender age of 3 in 1897, he would sit and listen in silence while his father read Charles Dickens aloud to him. It wasn't the stories alone. It was the manner in which Dickens brought characters to life using words. His father used to trace drawings from books, and Norman observed him. It was then something within him awakened. His grandfather had also been an artist, though he never earned much and had to be content with painting landscapes. But the flame had already been passed on. Their little house was full of stories, sketches, and unpretentious fights. That's what molded him. By age 9 in 1903, Norman was already an outsider. He was a scrawny kid, awkward, and didn't belong in school. He wasn't close to his parents either. Drawing became his refuge, something he could control, something that made sense. He spent hours drawing on his own, and gradually he started using humor and overdrawn features to deal with the manner in which people treated him. That was also the year his family left the city and settled in Montmorency, a small Westchester County town. It transformed everything. In Montmorency, Norman found quiet streets, open skies, and unfamiliar faces. He began falling in love with the notion of small-town living. He became fascinated with Howard Pyle's work, a well-known illustrator of the era. Norman saved pennies just to purchase art supplies. His mother maintained a strict religious household, but Norman continued to draw even during times of financial hardship. He observed everything about him, faces, gestures, small moments, and all found their way into his sketchbook. The combination of city and small-town life remained with him throughout his life. By 1908, when Norman was 14, he made a monumental decision. He quit high school and enrolled at the Chase School of Fine and Applied Art in New York. He rode the train back and forth to Montmorency each day. His family had little, but they did their best to support him. At Chase, he learned life drawing, including life classes with nude live models. That was a shock for a boy brought up in such a strict household, but he persevered. He was stubborn. In 1910, he enrolled at the National Academy of Design, and shortly thereafter to the Art Students League of New York. There he studied under instructors such as Thomas Fogarty, George Bridgman, and Frank Dumont. Fogarty instructed him in how to tell stories through pictures. Bridgman instructed him in drawing the human form accurately. That was when Norman gave up aspiring to be a fine artist. He knew his talent lay in illustration. He wished to share stories people would be able to feel. It was 1912 when Norman, only 18 years old, received his first big commission. Fogarty assisted him in obtaining a co-writing and illustrating commission to draw 12 Tell Me Why stories by Carl Claudy. He made $150 on that assignment. It wasn't merely for pay. That changed everything. His work was noticed by Edward Cave, who was constructing Boy's Life magazine. Norman entered the office with his heart full of hope. Cave offered him a shot. He asked him to illustrate scenes in a camping guide and ultimately more than 400 illustrations. Norman remained a gaunt 140 pounds and stood 6 feet tall, so thin that in World War I, the Navy would eventually turn him down for being too thin. But in 1912, it didn't count. His career had started. By 1913, only a year later, Norman was made the full-time art editor of Boy's Life. He was just 19. That type of job was unprecedented for someone so young. He toiled producing hundreds of paintings that determined the way Americans perceived the Boy Scouts. He made their uniforms immaculate, their faces genuine, their exploits memorable. His work was so in demand that the Boy Scout calendar was the best-selling calendar in the nation by 1929. This success early in his career did not turn him haughty. It made him meticulous. He had witnessed firsthand how fast everything could go wrong, so he labored twice as hard. Norman befriended a fellow artist by the name of Clyde Forsyth in 1914. Both of them worked for Boy's Life and rented an old barn that was previously owned by the renowned Western artist Frederick Remington. That studio was like holy ground. Forsyth challenged Norman to be more daring and send his work to the Saturday Evening Post. The two of them worked together, inspiring each other. Norman developed not only in talent, but in confidence. He was no longer a Boy Scout illustrator. He was something greater. In 1915, Norman was 20 and persuaded his family to relocate to New Rochelle. It was a good decision. New Rochelle was where the best illustrators resided. Illustrators such as Joseph Lyon Decker, one of Norman's greatest inspirations, maintained studios there. Having that, the creative community challenged Norman further. He forged new relationships, found mentors, and remained embedded in the publishing community in New York City. It was a money risk financially, but it opened doors he otherwise could not access. Then came 1916. Norman was 22. In that year, everything shifted. He finally sent work to the Saturday Evening Post. His first cover hit the stands in May of 1916. It was a thunderclap. Between the first issue in January of 1917, he had already done 6 covers for the Post. People were paying attention. Even Life magazine published a full-page advertisement deeming the Post the biggest show window in America. And Norman's art was smack in the middle of it. But success hit hard and quick. By age 25, Norman was spent. He quit working at Boy's Life to concentrate full-time on the Post. By that time, he'd already done 25 covers and dozens of drawings. It was a whirlwind. Although everything seemed fine on the surface, Norman still struggled with insecurity on the inside. By about 1911, he had become intensely insecure about the way he looked, his name, even where he stood in the world. He once said, "All I had was the ability to draw, which, as far as I could see, didn't count for much." But instead of giving up, he poured those feelings into his art. He painted people who felt awkward, nervous, overlooked, and in doing so, he made millions of Americans feel seen. In the summer of 1916, Norman Rockwell married Irene O'Connor, a school teacher who was 3 years older than him. He had just published his very first cover for the Saturday Evening Post that same year. They barely knew each other when he proposed at a boarding house in New Rochelle. But right from the start, things felt off. Irene wanted a normal home life. Norman couldn't stop working. He was obsessed with his paintings and often disappeared into his art, ignoring everything else. They never had children. Years later, he quietly admitted something heartbreaking. "After we'd been married a while, I realized she didn't love me." Still, the marriage dragged on for nearly 14 years. By 1929, just after the stock market crash, they agreed to take separate vacations. Irene filed for divorce shortly after in Reno. Even while his personal life was falling apart, Norman was becoming a national sensation. From 1916 to 1919, he created 25 covers for the Saturday Evening Post, many with World War I themes. One showed a boy questioning if a short man could be a soldier. His work was everywhere. Life magazine even used him in full-page ads to sell subscriptions. But behind all the success, Norman was only 22, and it was already too much for him. He began having anxiety and felt like he couldn't keep up with expectations. His friend Clyde Forsyth noticed that sometimes Norman just vanished for a while, afraid that people would forget about him. By 1920, his artwork was changing. It looked more refined, less cartoonish. He was getting praise from serious artists and had clearly grown under the guidance of his teacher, George Bridgman. But the pressure didn't stop. Norman collapsed under the weight of it all and suffered what was quietly called a nervous breakdown. He had to step away to recover. During this time, he became close friends with the famous illustrator J.C. Leyendecker, someone he looked up to. The breakdown was a turning point. He was still in his mid-20s, already carrying the weight of being the most recognized magazine illustrator in America. As the 1920s moved on, Norman started doing more than just magazine covers. Big brands wanted him for their ads. In 1923, he painted a Jell-O ad that showed a perfect smiling family in a happy kitchen. That kind of warmth would become his signature style. He worked for other magazines, too. Literary Digest, Country Gentleman, Leslie's Weekly, Judge, and Life. These ads paid well and gave him room to experiment. But even then, the pressure never truly went away. In 1929, while staying at Louisville Landing, he and Irene decided to take separate summer trips. Norman went to Europe to visit museums in France, Austria, and Spain. When he got back, Irene told him she had fallen in love with someone else. She wanted a divorce. Even though Norman had a habit of flirting with women himself, the news hit him hard. The divorce was finalized on January 13, 1930. He immediately escaped to Alhambra, California, and stayed with his friend Clyde Forsyth. That's when he painted the doctor and the doll. While there, Forsyth introduced him to Mary Barstow, a math teacher and aspiring writer who was 14 years younger. Norman married her just a few months later on April 17, 1930, in her parents' garden. The couple soon had 3 sons, Jarvis, Thomas, and Peter. But Norman's mental health was slipping again. By